Isn't that a strange gospel for the day after Christmas? It's like the Grinch won. Let's look at Stephen and find out why his feast is appropriate today. Stephen was part of the early Christian community, but he was part that spoke Greek. The Jewish people who lived in Palestine would normally speak Aramaic, like Jesus did. But then the Jews who lived in what they call the diaspora, the dispersion, would normally speak Greek. Our best guess is at the time of Jesus, there were about 8 million Jews living in the world, only 1 million of whom lived in Israel. All the rest were spread out. Well, Stephen was one of those Greek speakers, and the apostles realized that the money that they gathered and the food they gathered to help the widows and the orphans, it was all going to the Aramaic speakers, not the Greeks. And so they decided that what they're going to do is choose 7 men who will serve the needs of charity to the Greek-speaking widows and orphans. 2 things to notice here. First of all, a little bit of racial prejudice. That this is something that easily happens within a Christian community. And it's something that we have to watch out for. Sometimes it's just simply the way we were raised. I was blessed because I got to travel all over the world, and there were customs in places where I went which seemed at first very strange to me. In Romania, they all ran up to kiss my hand. And since tuberculosis was endemic, I was not thrilled about that. And one of the Romanians said, "Father, you got to let them kiss your hand, because they're not kissing your hand, they're kissing Christ's hand." So even in a good Christian community, there can be a little bit of prejudice. The second thing to notice, how do the apostles deal with it? They pray and they come to a decision to do something new. The willingness to look at the way things are going and change if necessary. That's a real surrender to God's will. And sometimes we think that God's will is this way and it'll always be this way, when it's just our own private peeve. We have to listen and then in prayer, in discernment, figure out where God is leading us. Well, Stephen is one of the 7 chosen for the service of diaconate. And the apostles say, you're going to be waiting on tables. And the second they walk out of the room, he starts preaching in the marketplace. And again, it's a sign that when we are called by the Lord, we have to use all of our gifts. Not just the gifts that were officially assigned, but even those other things. And Stephen's certainly is to preach in the opening. He's very good at it. He gets arrested. And realize this is not a normal legal arrest. It's extra legal. What we would call a kangaroo court. It's a mob. They grab him and they accuse him of speaking against the temple and against the law. Remember, Stephen spoke Greek. His family came from outside of Israel. So how often do you think his family would visit Jerusalem? Very rarely. So the temple was not a big thing for them. And he spoke against the law. Many of the Jewish people living outside of Israel, they had to fit in with the customs of their country. It's kind of like Jewish people in the States today who put up a Hanukkah bush, which is a Christmas tree without calling it that, right? You sort of have to go with the flow. So it's very possible Stephen did say a few things that could be interpreted in a nasty way. And they declare that he should die. They stone him. But notice what Stephen did as they're stoning him. He hands his spirit over to the Father, and he asks that they be forgiven for what they're doing. Does that sound familiar? That's exactly what Jesus did. And that's the reason we celebrate Stephen today. By dying, just as Jesus did, Stephen reminds us that Jesus is still with us. He's still here. Because yesterday we celebrated the birth of Jesus at Bethlehem. Today we talk about his birth by our dying to ourselves and giving witness. And that's the only way we'll be able to give birth to Jesus in the world, putting aside our prejudices, our needs, our pet peeves, and living Christ's message so that people can see this is a true story. For a lot of people, Christmas, it's cute. Stephen reminds us it's not cute. It's something that asks everything of us and even more. Now, one little question. St. Paul was standing by and probably helping in the martyrdom. What do you think St. Stephen said to St. Paul when Paul got to the pearly gates? I think one thing he might have been doing as a joke is just tossing a rock in his hand. But even after Paul was complicit in his murder, don't you think the first thing Stephen did is give him a good European kiss and say, "Welcome home"?